The wooden soldier's jaw snapped shut with a sound like breaking bone, and Hercule Poirot, who had been reaching for a gilded walnut from the crystal bowl, withdrew his immaculately manicured fingers with an involuntary start. The antique Nutcracker sat upon the mantelpiece of the Savoy's Palm Court, its painted eyes seeming to follow him with malevolent attention. Its crimson uniform faded to the colour of dried blood. Around him, the genteel sounds of afternoon tea continued unabated. The musical clink of silver against porcelain, the murmured conversations of London's fashionable set, the distant strains of a string quartet playing something appropriately seasonal. Yet Poirot found his attention fixed upon this curious object, this mechanical sentinel that had moved, he was quite certain, entirely of its own accord. "Monsieur Poirot!" The voice cut through his reverie like a knife through Belgian chocolate. "Thank heavens I found you. They said at your flat you might be here." The little Belgian turned to observe a young woman of perhaps 25 years, her face pale beneath a fashionable cloche hat, her gloved hands trembling as they clutched a beaded handbag. She was handsome rather than beautiful, with intelligent grey eyes now widened with what appeared to be genuine terror, and she wore the expensive but slightly dated clothing of old money in temporary distress. Poirot noted the careful mending at her cuff, the paste brooch substituting where family diamonds had once resided, the sensible shoes worn a season too long. "Mademoiselle," he said, rising with the fluid courtesy that characterized all his movements. "You have the advantage of me. Please, you will sit, you will take tea, and you will tell Poirot what it is that troubles you so greatly on this December afternoon." She collapsed into the offered chair with none of the graceful composure one might expect from a woman of her evident breeding, her breath coming in short gasps that threatened to become sobs. A waiter materialized with the silent efficiency of the well-trained servant, and Poirot ordered fresh tea and a selection of pastries, understanding that whatever crisis had brought this young woman to seek him out, it would be better faced with proper fortification. "My name is Clarissa Thorne," she managed at last, accepting the cup he pressed into her hands. "My uncle is Lord Dorian Thorne, of Whitmore Abbey in Derbyshire. You may have heard of him. He was something in the diplomatic service before the war, and he's been rather reclusive since." Poirot inclined his egg-shaped head, the afternoon light from the great windows catching the precise pomade of his hair. "The name, it is not unknown to me. Lord Thorne, he was involved in certain delicate matters in Constantinople, was he not? Before the unfortunate business with the Ottomans." Miss Thorne's teacup rattled against its saucer. "You know more than most, Monsieur Poirot. My uncle has enemies, old enemies from those days, and newer ones besides. But that is not why I've come to you." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's the Nutcracker, you see. The Thorne Nutcracker. It's going to kill someone at Christmas." The declaration hung in the air between them, absurd, and yet delivered with such conviction that Poirot found himself leaning forward, his grey cells suddenly alert with interest. Behind him, the antique Nutcracker on the mantelpiece seemed to grin its painted grin, and he resisted the urge to glance back at it. "You will explain, if you please," he said. "This Nutcracker of which you speak, it is what? A family heirloom? An object of value?" "It is all of those things, and more." Clarissa Thorne's grey eyes met his with desperate intensity. The Thorne Nutcracker was commissioned in 1785 by my ancestor, the 3rd Baron Thorne, from a master craftsman in Nuremberg. It is said to be one of the finest examples of its kind ever created. Nearly 2 feet tall, carved from ebony and dressed in a uniform of the Hussars, with rubies for eyes and gold leaf on every button. It is, depending on which expert you believe, worth somewhere between £20,000 and £50,000. Poirot's eyebrows rose appreciably. Such a sum would purchase a very fine house indeed, or keep a declining estate solvent for several years. And this valuable object, it is currently at Whitmore Abbey. It is always at Whitmore Abbey for Christmas, Miss Thorne replied. That is the tradition, you see. The Nutcracker comes out on Christmas Eve and presides over the festivities until Twelfth Night. But there is more to it than that, Monsieur Poirot. There is the curse. She spoke the word with the mixture of embarrassment and belief that Poirot had observed in many an English person confronted with the supernatural. The rational mind dismissing such nonsense, even as the ancestral memory whispered of darker possibilities. He said nothing, merely waited with the patience that had served him so well in countless investigations, and after a moment, she continued. The craftsman who made the Nutcracker was named Johann Drosselmeyer, a coincidence that would amuse anyone familiar with the ballet, but this was decades before Hoffmann wrote his story. Drosselmeyer was said to be something of a mystic, as well as a master carver, and when my ancestor attempted to cheat him of his full payment, he laid a curse upon the Nutcracker and all who would possess it. Clarissa's voice trembled. He said that the Nutcracker would take a life in payment for every generation that refused to honour the debt. And Monsieur Poirot, in every generation since, someone has died at Whitmore Abbey during the Christmas season. Every single one. The fire crackled in the grate, and somewhere in the room a woman laughed, the sound jarring against the gravity of Miss Thorne's words. Poirot stroked his magnificent moustache, his expression thoughtful. "These deaths," he said carefully, "they have been investigated? They have been found to be what? Accidents? Natural causes?" "Some of each," she admitted. Great-great-uncle Reginald fell from the gallery on Christmas Eve, 1842. His son drowned in the ornamental lake on Boxing Day, 1869. My own grandfather's brother was found at the foot of the main staircase on Christmas morning, 1897. They said he had been sleepwalking and tumbled down in the dark. And my father's cousin, Marcus. She shuddered. He was found in the conservatory on the night of the Christmas ball in 1920, strangled with a length of ribbon from one of the decorations. That one they called murder, but they never found who did it. Poirot's grey cells were now fully engaged, cataloguing these deaths across the generations, noting the pattern that emerged. Every 25 to 30 years, a death at Christmas. The latest in 1920, which meant, "This year," he said quietly. "You fear that this year the curse will claim another victim?" Clarissa Thorne nodded, her face ashen. "My uncle has invited the entire family to Whitmore Abbey for Christmas. The first time in years that we've all been together. His health has been failing, you see, and he says he wants one last gathering before the end. But, Monsieur Poirot, I'm terrified. There are people coming who hate each other, people with terrible secrets, people who would benefit greatly from my uncle's death. And the Nutcracker will be watching over all of it, waiting to claim its due." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a newspaper clipping, worn from much handling. "This appeared in the Times a fortnight ago. A gossip column, nothing more, but read what it says." Poirot took the cutting and adjusted his pince-nez. The column was the usual society froth, but one paragraph had been circled in trembling pencil. "We hear that Lord Thorne of Whitmore Abbey is to host a family Christmas for the first time since the tragedy of 1920. One wonders if the famous Thorne Nutcracker will preside over the festivities as usual, and whether that notorious artifact will crack more than walnuts this season. "You see?" Clarissa whispered. "Even the newspapers are predicting it. Someone is going to die, Monsieur Poirot. I can feel it in my bones, and I want you there to stop it." Poirot folded the clipping and returned it to her with a grave inclination of his head. "Mademoiselle Thorne, Hercule Poirot. He does not believe in curses. The supernatural, it is the refuge of those who cannot perceive the natural explanations that lie before their eyes. But murder, murder is very much within my purview. And what you have described to me, this pattern of deaths, this gathering of persons with motive and opportunity, this valuable object that might inspire theft or violence, these things, they interest me greatly." He paused, and his bright eyes met hers with sudden intensity. "Tell me, mademoiselle, among those invited to this Christmas gathering, is there anyone you particularly suspect? Anyone you believe might take advantage of the curse, as it were, to commit a crime under its convenient cover?" The question hung between them, and Clarissa Thorne's face underwent a subtle transformation, the fear giving way to something harder, something that spoke of family feuds and bitter jealousies nursed across decades. "My cousin Valentine," she said at last. "Valentine Thorne. He is my uncle's heir, and he has been waiting for years, decades, for his inheritance. He is drowning in gambling debts, and there are whispers that he owes money to some very dangerous people. If Uncle Dorian dies before the new year, Valentine inherits everything, free of the death duties that the new tax laws will impose. He has every reason to want my uncle dead, and soon." "And yet your uncle has invited him to Christmas?" "My uncle believes in family, Monsieur Poirot. He believes that blood ties can heal all wounds." Her laugh was bitter. "He is, I'm afraid, rather naive in that regard." Poirot nodded slowly, his mind already constructing the web of relationships and motives that would await him at Whitmore Abbey. "Very well, mademoiselle. You have engaged the interest of Hercule Poirot. I shall accompany you to Derbyshire, and I shall observe this gathering. And I shall ensure that the Nutcracker claims no victims this Christmas, curse or no curse." Relief flooded Clarissa Thorne's face, and for a moment she looked almost beautiful. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Thank you. My uncle knows you are coming. I took the liberty of mentioning you might be persuaded, and he was delighted. He admires your work enormously, you know. He said..." She hesitated. "He said that if anyone could break the curse, it would be you." As they made arrangements for his journey to Whitmore Abbey, he would take the train to Derby on the 22nd, where a car would meet him. Poirot found his gaze drawn once more to the antique nutcracker on the mantelpiece. It sat motionless now, as a carved wooden soldier should, its jaw fixed in its eternal grin. But as Clarissa Thorne took her leave, disappearing into the grey December afternoon, Poirot could have sworn he saw the painted eyes flicker, just for an instant, in his direction. He shook his head, dismissing the fancy. The curse was superstition, nothing more. But the deaths were real, and somewhere among the guests at Whitmore Abbey, a murderer might well be planning to add another victim to the tally. Hercule Poirot finished his tea, left a generous tip for the waiter, and went home to pack his warmest waistcoat. Christmas in the country, he reflected, was never his preferred way to spend the holiday. But duty called, and the grey cells demanded exercise. The Thorne Nutcracker awaited him. The train journey north was every bit as tedious as Poirot had anticipated. December had seized England in its grey fist, and the countryside that rolled past his first-class window was a watercolour study in brown and white. Bare trees standing sentinel over fields dusted with the season's first snow. Villagers huddled around church spires like sheep around a shepherd. The occasional grand house glimpsed through skeletal parkland. Poirot, who infinitely preferred the comforts of London to the privations of the English countryside, passed the time reviewing the information that Miss Thorne had provided about her fellow guests. The guest list for Christmas at Whitmore Abbey was, he reflected, a perfect recipe for disaster. In addition to the host, Lord Dorian Thorne, 73 years old, in failing health, possessed of a considerable fortune and an even more considerable collection of art and antiquities, there would be gathered under one roof no fewer than 4 potential heirs, 2 bitter rivals, a mysterious stranger, and the usual complement of servants who saw everything and said nothing. Valentine Thorne, the heir apparent, would be accompanied by his wife Sophia, a former actress of considerable beauty and dubious reputation. Clarissa had described her cousin's wife with barely concealed contempt, a fortune hunter who had captured Valentine in his cups and refused to release him, regardless of his obvious misery. The marriage, by all accounts, was one of mutual loathing, sustained only by mutual need. She required his name and eventual inheritance. He required her talent for keeping his creditors at bay with promises and performances. Then there was Julian Thorne, Lord Dorian's younger nephew, who had surprised everyone by taking holy orders and becoming a vicar in some remote parish in Norfolk. "Julian is a saint," Clarissa had said, though something in her tone suggested the designation was not entirely complimentary. "He gave up his claim to the inheritance when he entered the church, or so he says, but saints can be rather tiresome, don't you find? Always making one feel inadequate by comparison." The Honourable Beatrice Thorne, Lord Dorian's only sister, would be attending with her companion, Miss Agatha Fenn, a dried-up spinster, according to Clarissa, who had attached herself to Beatrice 30 years ago and never let go. Beatrice had quarrelled with her brother over some matter that no one would discuss openly, and had not set foot in Whitmore Abbey since before the war. Her acceptance of this Christmas invitation had been the source of considerable speculation. Sir Gerald Marsh would be there as well, not a Thorne by blood, but connected by marriage to some distant branch of the family, and, more importantly, Lord Dorian's solicitor and the executor of his will. "Uncle Dorian trusts him completely," Clarissa had explained. "Perhaps too completely. There have been whispers about irregularities in the estate accounts, though no one can prove anything." And finally, there was a name that had made Poirot's magnificent moustache twitch with interest. Count Alexei Volkonsky, a white Russian émigré who had appeared in London society some 5 years ago, claiming to be a distant connection of the Thorne family through some Byzantine intermarriage in the 18th century. "He has documents," Clarissa had said doubtfully. "Uncle Dorian believes they're genuine. He's become rather obsessed with the family history in his old age, and the Count has been feeding that obsession with stories of the Thorne ancestors and their continental adventures." but Valentine is convinced the man is a fraud and a fortune hunter. The train pulled into Derby Station with a screech of brakes and a great belching of steam, and Poirot gathered his belongings with the precise movements of a man for whom disorder was anathema. His fellow passengers hurried past him, eager to escape the confines of the carriage and begin their Christmas holidays. But Poirot moved with measured deliberation, allowing the crowd to thin before he stepped onto the platform. A chauffeur in dark livery was waiting for him, holding a card with his name written in elegant copperplate. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm Jenkins from Whitmore Abbey. Lord Thorne sends his compliments and hopes your journey was comfortable." "It was adequate," Poirot replied, surrendering his luggage to the man's capable hands. "The English railway, it is not what it was before the war, but one makes allowances. Tell me, Jenkins, how far is it to Whitmore Abbey?" "About 15 miles, sir, through the hills. The road can be treacherous in winter, but we've had no heavy snow yet." The chauffeur's face was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes, a flicker of unease, quickly suppressed, caught Poirot's attention. "Though the forecast is for a storm on Christmas Eve. Could be quite severe, they say." "Ah," said Poirot, settling into the back seat of the ancient Rolls-Royce that waited at the station entrance. "Then we must hope that all the guests arrive before the storm, must we not? It would be most inconvenient to be trapped at Whitmore Abbey without the full complement of suspects. I mean, of course, guests." Jenkins's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, and for a moment something passed between them. An acknowledgement that the chauffeur was not fooled by Poirot's presence, that the household knew perfectly well why the famous detective had been invited. Then the moment passed, and Jenkins was simply a servant once more, navigating the Rolls through Derby's narrow streets and out into the winter countryside. The drive to Whitmore Abbey took nearly an hour, the roads winding through increasingly wild terrain as they climbed into the Derbyshire hills. Poirot, who had little appreciation for natural beauty under the best of circumstances, found himself nonetheless impressed by the stark grandeur of the landscape. The limestone escarpments rising like ancient fortifications, the dark clusters of pine that crowned the hilltops, the occasional glimpse of a frozen stream glinting in the weak December sun. It was country that seemed to belong to an older England, a wilder and more dangerous time, and he understood why legends and curses might flourish in such a place. They passed through a village, a handful of stone cottages clustered around a Norman church, a pub called the Nutcracker's Arms, with a painted sign that made Poirot's eyebrows rise. And then began the long ascent up a private drive lined with ancient oaks. And there, at the crest of the hill, Whitmore Abbey revealed itself. The house was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. It had begun as a medieval monastery, Poirot knew from his research, before being seized during the dissolution and transformed into a private residence. Successive generations of Thornes had added to it according to their tastes and fortunes. A Jacobean wing here, a Georgian extension there, a Victorian tower that loomed over the whole like a disapproving dowager, until the result was a sprawling stone labyrinth that seemed to have grown organically from the hillside. Gargoyles leered from the gutters, mullioned windows stared blankly across the formal gardens, and a great iron weather vane in the shape of a soldier, a nutcracker soldier, Poirot noted with grim amusement, creaked in the wind atop the highest chimney. Whitmore Abbey, Jenkins announced, quite unnecessarily. The car swept around the circular drive and came to a halt before the main entrance, where stone steps rose to massive oak doors flanked by torches already lit against the gathering dusk. A butler waited at the top of the steps, his posture rigid with decades of professional dignity, his face betraying nothing of whatever thoughts might lurk behind those hooded eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler intoned as Poirot emerged from the car. "I am Blackwood, the butler. Lord Thorne has asked me to convey his apologies. He is resting before dinner. But he hopes you will find your accommodations satisfactory. Miss Thorne is in the drawing room and has asked if you would join her when you are settled." "Thank you, Blackwood." Poirot allowed himself to be led through the great doors and into the entrance hall, and there he stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The hall was vast, 2 stories high, with a hammer-beam ceiling that vanished into shadow, and it had been decorated for Christmas with lavish abandon. Garlands of holly and ivy wound up the banisters of the grand staircase. Candles flickered in every sconce and chandelier, and an enormous tree rose in the centre of the hall, its branches weighted with glass ornaments that caught the light like captured stars. But none of this commanded Poirot's attention. On the mantelpiece above the great stone fireplace, in a place of obvious honour, stood the Thorne Nutcracker. It was every bit as magnificent as Clarissa had described. Nearly 2 feet tall, carved from ebony so dark it seemed to absorb the light. Dressed in the uniform of a hussar, complete with gold braid and crimson facing, its jaw was set in the perpetual grin of its kind, revealing teeth of polished ivory, and its eyes, those famous ruby eyes, glowed with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. The firelight played across its painted face, giving it the appearance of movement, of animation, of malevolent sentience. Poirot stood transfixed, aware that Blackwood was watching him with an expression that might have been amusement, might have been warning. The Nutcracker's ruby gaze met his across the hall, and he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. "A remarkable object, is it not?" Blackwood murmured. "The family's most prized possession. Some say it is haunted by the spirit of the craftsman who made it. Others say it houses a demon that awakens at Christmas time to claim its tithe of blood." "And what do you say, Blackwood?" The butler's face remained impassive. "I say, Monsieur Poirot, that objects cannot kill. Only men can do that. But I also say that in my 37 years of service at Whitmore Abbey, I have seen things that I cannot explain, and I have learned not to dismiss the old stories simply because they are old." He paused. "Shall I show you to your room?" Poirot followed the butler up the grand staircase, but his mind remained below, in the hall where the Thorne Nutcracker stood eternal guard. He had told Clarissa that he did not believe in curses, and that was true. But he believed in evil, and he believed in human nature, and both of those, he suspected, would be on full display at Whitmore Abbey this Christmas. His room was comfortable enough, a 4-poster bed hung with velvet curtains, a fire already burning in the grate, his luggage waiting to be unpacked. But Poirot had no attention to spare for creature comforts. He went immediately to the window and looked out over the grounds, noting the layout of the gardens, the positions of the outbuildings, the various paths and approaches that might be relevant to whatever drama was about to unfold. The formal gardens lay directly below, geometric patterns of box hedging now frosted with snow, with a fountain at their centre that had been drained for the winter. Beyond them stretched a wilderness garden, artfully arranged to appear natural, that merged into genuine woodland on the hillside. To the east, he could see the towers of what appeared to be a ruined chapel. To the west, the bulk of the Victorian wing blocked his view of the servants' quarters and stables. As he watched, a figure emerged from the woodland and hurried across the lawn toward the house. It was a man, well-dressed but moving with furtive haste, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder as though he feared pursuit. Something in his posture spoke of guilt, of secrets, of a conscience ill at ease. Poirot leaned closer to the window, trying to make out the man's features, but the failing light and his own distance made identification impossible. The figure disappeared around the corner of the house, presumably, heading for one of the side entrances, and Poirot was left with only questions. He turned from the window and began, methodically, to unpack his things. The evening would bring dinner, introductions, and the first opportunity to observe the assembled company in their natural habitat. The game, as a certain fictional detective might say, was afoot. The dinner gong sounded at 8 o'clock precisely, its sonorous note echoing through the corridors of Whitmore Abbey like a summons to judgment. Poirot, who had spent the intervening hours in careful preparation, his evening clothes immaculate, his moustache waxed to perfection, his mind sharpened for the ordeal ahead, descended the grand staircase with measured tread, and entered the drawing-room to find most of the company already assembled. The room was a monument to Victorian excess, every surface crowded with ornaments and photographs and potted palms. The walls hung with dark portraits of ancestors who gazed down with expressions of aristocratic disapproval. A fire blazed in the marble fireplace, before which stood a tall, thin man of perhaps 60 years, his face haggard with illness, but his eyes bright with the unmistakable spark of intelligence. This, Poirot knew immediately, must be Lord Dorian Thorne. "Monsieur Poirot!" The host came forward with outstretched hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. "What a pleasure! What an honour to have you under my roof. Clarissa has told me of your reputation, of course, but I had despaired of ever meeting you in person. Welcome to Whitmore Abbey." "My lord, the honour is mine," Poirot replied with a courtly bow. "You have a magnificent home, and I am grateful for your hospitality at this festive season." Lord Thorne's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Festive, yes, we must call it that. Though I confess, Monsieur Poirot, that I invited you here for reasons that go beyond mere social pleasure. But we shall speak of that later. For now, allow me to introduce you to my family." He gestured toward the assembled company, and Poirot found himself being led around the room like a prize exhibit, shaking hands and murmuring pleasantries, while his grey cells catalogued every detail of dress, manner, and expression. Valentine Thorne, the heir, was a surprise. Poirot had expected a dissolute wastrel, but the man who rose to greet him was handsome, well-groomed, and almost unnervingly charming. Only the slight tremor in his hands and the desperate brightness of his eyes betrayed the demons that lurked beneath the polished surface. His wife Sophia stood beside him, a flame-haired beauty whose décolletage pushed the boundaries of propriety and whose smile revealed teeth like a predator's. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, offering her hand to be kissed. "I've always wanted to meet a real detective. It must be so thrilling, poking about in other people's dirty laundry." "Madame, I assure you, the laundry is often less interesting than one might suppose." It is the people themselves who provide the fascination. The Reverend Julian Thorne was everything his cousin was not. Plain, where Valentine was handsome, awkward, where Valentine was smooth, his clerical collar sitting on his thin neck like a reproach. But his eyes, Poirot noted, were shrewd and watchful, and they missed very little of what transpired in the room. "A detective at Christmas," Julian murmured as he shook Poirot's hand. "How singular. One hopes there will be no need for your professional services, of course, but one cannot help wondering." "Wondering what, Reverend?" Julian smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Wondering whether God or man will have jurisdiction over whatever happens at Whitmore Abbey this Christmas." The Honourable Beatrice Thorne was a large woman of indeterminate age, her iron-grey hair piled atop her head in an old-fashioned style, her considerable bosom heaving with every breath like the swell of a stormy sea. She regarded Poirot with frank suspicion through a lorgnette that seemed designed more for intimidation than for seeing. "A foreigner," she pronounced, "and a detective. Dorian, have you taken leave of your senses? What can this little Belgian possibly do that the police cannot?" "Now, Beatrice," Lord Thorne soothed. "Monsieur Poirot is my guest, and you will treat him with the courtesy that his reputation deserves." Behind Beatrice, her companion, Miss Agatha Fenn, hovered like a shadow, her thin face and colourless eyes suggesting a woman who had long since resigned herself to a life of invisibility. She nodded to Poirot, but said nothing, and he filed her away in his mental catalogue as a person of interest. The silent ones often knew the most. Sir Gerald Marsh, the solicitor, was a florid man, with the hearty manner of one who makes his living reassuring anxious clients that everything is perfectly in order. His handshake was too firm, his smile too wide, and his eyes slid away from Poirot's gaze with a rapidity that spoke of things concealed. "Delighted, delighted," he boomed. "Any friend of Lord Thorne's is a friend of mine. Dreadful weather we're having, isn't it? But I expect that's nothing to you, coming from Belgium. Cold country, Belgium. Or is it? I've never been." And finally, Count Alexei Volkonsky, a lean man of about 50, with the high cheekbones and dark eyes that spoke of Slavic ancestry, dressed in evening clothes that were slightly too theatrical for an English country house. He clicked his heels and bowed from the waist, a gesture that was either continental courtesy or deliberate affectation, and addressed Poirot in French. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I understand you have solved some of the most baffling cases in Europe." "The Count flatters me," Poirot replied, also in French. "But tell me, Count Volkonsky, how does a Russian nobleman come to be spending Christmas in an English country house?" The Count's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Family connections, Monsieur Poirot. The Volkonskys and the Thornes have been linked by blood and marriage for generations. I am merely claiming my place at the ancestral table." Their eyes met and held for a long moment, two men taking each other's measure, before the arrival of Clarissa Thorne broke the tension. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm so glad you could come." She swept toward him, lovely in a simple gown of midnight blue, her earlier terror replaced by a hostess's composure. But her eyes, he noted, kept darting toward the door, toward the corners of the room, toward the shadows where the firelight did not reach. She was still afraid, this young woman, and trying very hard not to show it. Blackwood appeared to announce dinner, and the company processed into the dining room in a careful hierarchy of rank and precedence. Poirot found himself seated between Miss Fenn and the Reverend Julian, with a clear view of Lord Thorne at the head of the table and Valentine and Sophia directly across from him. The Count sat beside their host, engaging him in animated conversation about some matter of family history, while Beatrice and Sir Gerald flanked Clarissa at the foot of the table. The meal was excellent. Consommé, followed by sole, followed by pheasant, followed by a parade of removes and sweets that would have been excessive even for a London restaurant. But Poirot ate mechanically, his attention focused on the interplay of personalities around the table. Valentine drank too much and grew progressively louder, his charm curdling into something ugly as the wine flowed. Sophia watched her husband with cold calculation, occasionally steering him away from the most egregious behaviour with a touch on his arm or a murmured word. Julian ate little and spoke less, his attention apparently fixed on some inner contemplation, though twice Poirot caught him watching Valentine with an expression that might have been pity, might have been contempt. Beatrice held court at her end of the table, dominating the conversation with pronouncements on everything from the state of modern morals to the inadequacy of the soup. Miss Fenn sat silent beside her, occasionally murmuring agreement, while Sir Gerald laughed too heartily at jokes that were not funny, and Clarissa played the perfect hostess, with a smile that never reached her eyes. And at the head of the table, Lord Thorne presided over it all, with the weary satisfaction of a man who has achieved a long-held goal and suspects he will pay for it dearly. He spoke little, but his eyes missed nothing, and when they met Poirot's across the glittering expanse of silver and crystal, there was a message in them. A plea, perhaps, or a warning. It was as the dessert course was being served that the first incident occurred. The lights flickered, all of them simultaneously, and in that moment of darkness, a sound cut through the buzz of conversation, the unmistakable click-clack of a nutcracker's jaw snapping shut. Sophia screamed. Valentine cursed. Someone knocked over a glass, and the crash of breaking crystal seemed to break the spell. The lights steadied, burning bright once more, and the company looked at each other with expressions ranging from embarrassment to terror. "What the devil was that?" Sir Gerald demanded. "The electrical supply," Lord Thorne said calmly. "It's always been unreliable. Nothing to concern yourselves about." But Poirot noticed that his host's hands were trembling, and that his eyes had gone not to the lights, but to the doorway that led back to the entrance hall, to the place where the Thorne Nutcracker stood its eternal vigil. "Perhaps," the Count said softly, "the Nutcracker is simply welcoming us to Christmas." No one laughed. The remainder of the meal passed in subdued conversation, and when Lord Thorne finally rose to lead the ladies to the drawing room for coffee, the relief in the room was palpable. Poirot excused himself, pleading fatigue from his journey, and made his way back to the entrance hall. The Nutcracker stood where it had been, unchanged, unmoved, and yet somehow different. Its ruby eyes seemed brighter than before, its grin wider, its painted face more knowing. Poirot approached it slowly, studying every detail with the intensity that had made him famous. The object was undeniably beautiful, a masterpiece of the carver's art. The uniform was perfect in every detail, from the gold braid on the shoulders to the tiny buttons on the gaiters. The jaw mechanism was cleverly concealed, designed to crack even the hardest nuts with mechanical efficiency. And the eyes, those famous ruby eyes, seemed to pulse with an inner light that should have been impossible. Poirot reached out to touch it, and "I wouldn't do that if I were you." He turned to find the Reverend Julian standing behind him, his face pale in the candlelight. "It is said," Julian continued, "that those who touch the Nutcracker without permission are marked for death. My cousin Marcus touched it the night he was killed. So did my great-grandfather, and his father before him. He paused. Of course, it's only a superstition, but superstitions have a way of becoming true when enough people believe in them. You think the curse is real, Reverend? Julian's smile was bitter. I think, Monsieur Poirot, that there is evil in this house. Evil that has festered for generations, feeding on greed and jealousy and hatred. Whether that evil takes the form of a wooden soldier or a human murderer hardly matters. The result is the same. And what is the result? Death, Julian said simply. Death at Christmas, as regular as the striking of the clock. It has happened before, and it will happen again. The only question is who will be the victim this time. He turned and walked away, leaving Poirot alone with the Nutcracker. The detective stood for a long moment, his grey cells working furiously. Then, with deliberate care, he reached out and touched the wooden soldier's cheek. Nothing happened. No lightning, no thunder, no supernatural retribution. Just cold, smooth wood beneath his fingertips. But as he withdrew his hand, he could have sworn he heard, from somewhere deep within the house, the distant sound of laughter. The night passed without further incident, though Poirot slept poorly, his dreams troubled by images of wooden soldiers marching through corridors of blood. He rose early, dressed with his usual precision, and made his way down to the breakfast room, where he found himself alone with Clarissa Thorne. You couldn't sleep either, she said, pouring him coffee without asking. The house does that to people. Too many ghosts. You do not believe in ghosts, mademoiselle? No. She set down the pot and met his eyes. But I believe in murderers, Monsieur Poirot, and I believe there is one under this roof. Tell me about your cousin, Valentine. The request was blunt, perhaps deliberately so, and Clarissa's reaction was instructive, a flash of something complex crossing her face before she composed herself. Valentine is complicated. We were close as children, you know. Before his father's death, before the gambling, before Sophia. He was kind then, and clever, and full of dreams. She paused. Now he is none of those things. The man you met at dinner is a shell, Monsieur Poirot. A hollow shell animated by desperation and debt. And his wife? Sophia? Clarissa's laugh was harsh. Sophia is a serpent who has coiled herself around my cousin and will not release him until she has squeezed out every drop of value. She was a chorus girl when he met her. Did you know that? Third row from the left at the Gaiety Theatre. She saw an opportunity and she took it, and Valentine was too drunk and too foolish to see the trap until it had closed. You do not like her? I despise her. The venom in Clarissa's voice was startling. But more than that, I fear her. Sophia is capable of anything, Monsieur Poirot. Anything at all. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other guests. Sir Gerald, looking even more florid than the night before. The Count, sleek and inscrutable. Beatrice, commanding Miss Fenn to fetch her a warmer shawl. The breakfast proceeded in the English fashion, with silver dishes of eggs and bacon and kidneys keeping warm over spirit lamps, and the conversation turned to plans for the day. I thought we might have a shooting party, Lord Thorne suggested. The weather looks to be holding, and there are pheasants in the West Wood. Valentine, Julian, Count, would you care to join me? Valentine muttered something about a headache, earning a venomous glance from his wife. Julian declined on grounds of his profession, and the Count, expressing elegant regret, mentioned correspondence that required his attention. In the end, only Sir Gerald expressed enthusiasm for the outing, and even he seemed more dutiful than eager. Poirot excused himself after breakfast, claiming desire to explore the house and grounds. Lord Thorne granted permission with evident pleasure, insisting that he make himself entirely at home and examine anything that caught his interest. It was, Poirot reflected, an unusual degree of access for a guest, almost as though his host were inviting him to conduct an investigation before any crime had been committed. He began his exploration in the entrance hall, studying the Nutcracker in the clear morning light that streamed through the tall windows. By daylight, the object seemed less ominous, merely a beautiful antique, exquisitely crafted, but fundamentally inanimate. The ruby eyes were glass, nothing more. The jaw mechanism was clockwork and springs. The uniform was paint and gold leaf. And yet... Poirot moved through the ground floor of the house with methodical thoroughness, mapping the layout in his mind. The drawing room, the dining room, the library, the morning room, the conservatory. Each space offering different sightlines, different opportunities for concealment, different possibilities for both attack and escape. He noted the locations of doors, windows, and servants' passages. He observed which locks were sturdy and which were merely decorative. He tested the floor for creaking boards that might betray a nocturnal prowler. In the library, he discovered Lord Thorne's collection of documents relating to the Nutcracker's history. Letters from the original Drosselmeyer, records of the alleged curse, newspaper accounts of each Christmas death stretching back across nearly a century and a half. It was, he had to admit, compelling evidence of a pattern, though whether that pattern represented supernatural malevolence or very human malice remained to be determined. He was examining a particularly interesting letter, dated 1897, from the local constable to Lord Thorne's grandfather, expressing regret that the circumstances of the latest death could not be adequately explained, when a soft cough announced that he was no longer alone. Miss Agatha Fenn stood in the doorway, her colourless eyes fixed on him with an expression that might have been fear, might have been hope. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I speak with you? It is a matter of some urgency." "But of course, mademoiselle. Please, sit." She perched on the edge of a chair, her hands twisted together in her lap, her gaze darting to the door as though she feared interruption. "I know things," she said at last. "Things about this family that no one else knows. I have been with Miss Beatrice for 30 years, Monsieur Poirot, and in that time I have seen and heard much that was meant to be secret. I know why Miss Beatrice quarrelled with her brother. I know what Valentine did in London last month. I know where the Count goes when he claims to be attending to correspondence." Poirot leaned forward, his grey cells suddenly alert. "And why do you tell me these things, mademoiselle?" Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Because I am afraid, Monsieur Poirot. The curse is real. I have seen its work too many times to doubt it. And I fear that before this Christmas is over, it will claim another victim. I do not wish to be that victim, and so I am willing to tell you what I know, in exchange for your protection." "Protection from whom?" Miss Fenn's voice dropped even lower. "From the one who will kill to keep the family's secrets buried. From the one who is already killed, though the world does not know it. From the one who stands to gain everything if Lord Thorne dies before the new year." "You speak of Valentine?" "I speak of no one by name. Not yet. But if you meet me tonight, after everyone has retired, in the conservatory at midnight, I will tell you everything. And then, perhaps, you will be able to prevent what is coming." Before Poirot could respond, the sound of footsteps in the corridor made Miss Fenn leap to her feet, her face draining of what little colour it possessed. "Tonight," she whispered. "The conservatory. Midnight. Come alone." And then she was gone, slipping through a door he had not noticed, leaving Poirot alone with his thoughts and the musty smell of old secrets. The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. The shooting party returned empty-handed. The pheasants, Lord Thorne explained with wry resignation, had evidently been warned, and luncheon was a subdued affair. Valentine appeared late, looking distinctly unwell, and his wife's ministrations seemed designed more to torment than to comfort. The Count remained closeted in his room, emerging only briefly to collect a cup of tea before disappearing once more. Julian sat in a corner of the drawing-room, reading what appeared to be a theological treatise, though his eyes rarely seemed to rest on the page. Poirot used the time to continue his investigation, examining the servants' wing with Blackwood's reluctant assistance. The butler answered his questions with the minimum of words, neither lying nor volunteering information, his manner that of a man who had learned long ago to keep his own counsel. But when Poirot asked about the night Marcus Thorne had died, the last murder, in 1920, something shifted in the old man's face. "I found the body," Blackwood said quietly. "I was the first to see him, lying there in the conservatory with that ribbon around his throat. He was still warm, Monsieur Poirot. Still warm, but quite dead." "And you saw no one? Heard nothing?" "The house was full of guests. The Christmas ball was in full swing. Anyone might have slipped away without being noticed." "But someone was noticed, were they not?" "There was a suspect at the time. I have read the newspaper accounts." Blackwood's face closed like a door. "That was a long time ago, Monsieur Poirot. The police investigated and found nothing. The matter was closed." "Who was suspected, Blackwood?" The butler was silent for a long moment. Then, "Lord Thorne's younger brother, Cedric. He and Marcus had quarrelled that evening, about money, they said, or perhaps about a woman. Cedric disappeared that same night and was never seen again. Some say he fled the country. Others say..." He paused. "Others say he never left Whitmore Abbey at all." "You think he was murdered? His body concealed?" "I think, Monsieur Poirot, that there are secrets in this house that go deeper than any curse. And I think that you would be wise to tread carefully." It was good advice, and Poirot intended to take it. But first, he had an appointment to keep. The hours crept by. Tea was served in the drawing-room, where the conversation turned to the following day's festivities. Christmas Eve, with its traditional carol service in the village church, and the annual unveiling ceremony, where the Nutcracker would be moved from the entrance hall to a place of honour in the drawing-room. Lord Thorne spoke of the tradition with evident pleasure, but Poirot noticed that more than one face in the room went pale at the mention of the ceremony. Dinner was another elaborate affair. 7 courses that seemed designed to postpone the inevitable. The conversation grew more strained as the evening progressed, and by the time the port was circulating, Valentine was openly drunk, making comments that bordered on accusations and earning sharp words from his uncle. "Enough!" Lord Thorne finally commanded, his voice cutting through the wine-fueled argument. "This is Christmas, not a court of law. Whatever grievances you have, Valentine, they can wait until the holiday is over." "Can they?" Valentine lurched to his feet, his handsome face twisted with something between rage and despair. "Can they wait until after you've changed your will, uncle?" "Yes, I know about that. Don't look so surprised. I know everything that happens in this house. You're going to disinherit me, aren't you? Going to leave it all to that Russian imposter?" That snake who's been poisoning your ears with his lies. Valentine! Sophia's hand closed on her husband's arm like a vice. You're making a scene. Sit down. I will not sit down. I've been silent too long, held my tongue while this family schemed against me, watched while my birthright was stolen, piece by piece. That is quite enough. Lord Thorne rose, and, despite his frailty, there was authority in his bearing that silenced even his nephew. You forget yourself, Valentine. You forget the respect you owe to this house and to me. We will speak tomorrow when you are sober. For now, I suggest you retire. Valentine opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. With a last venomous glance at the Count, who had watched the entire scene with the expression of a man enjoying a moderately entertaining play, he stumbled toward the door. Merry Christmas, he snarled over his shoulder. Merry bloody Christmas to one and all. The door slammed behind him, and in the silence that followed, Poirot heard what might have been the entrance hall, the soft click of the Nutcracker's jaw. The company dispersed shortly after, each guest retreating to their room with muttered excuses. Poirot made a show of retiring as well, climbing the grand staircase and entering his chamber. But he did not prepare for bed. Instead, he sat in the darkness by the window, watching the hands of his pocket watch crawl toward midnight. At 11:45, he slipped from his room and made his way through the sleeping house, moving with silent care through corridors illuminated only by the occasional nightlight. The house seemed different in the darkness, larger and more labyrinthine, its familiar rooms transformed into places of shadow and menace. From somewhere came the distant tick of a clock. From somewhere else, the creak of settling timber. And always, beneath it all, the feeling of being watched. The conservatory occupied the south wing of the house, a Victorian addition filled with tropical plants that seemed impossibly exotic in the December cold. Gas lamps had been left burning low, casting pools of greenish light among the fronds and ferns, creating shadows that shifted and moved with every flicker of the flame. Miss Fenn was not there. Poirot checked his watch. 12 minutes past midnight. He was late. The corridors had taken longer to navigate than he had anticipated, but surely she would have waited. He moved deeper into the conservatory, past orchids and palms and the great central fountain that had been drained for the season, searching for any sign of the woman who had promised to reveal the family's secrets. He found her behind a stand of ferns, half hidden in the shadows. She was dead. Her body lay twisted on the flagstones, her colourless eyes staring up at nothing, her face frozen in an expression of terminal terror. Around her throat, wound tight enough to bite into the flesh, was a length of crimson ribbon. The same ribbon, Poirot realised with a shock, that was used to decorate the great Christmas tree in the entrance hall. And clutched in her hand, as though she had been trying to protect it even in death, was a small leather notebook. Poirot knelt beside the body, his mind racing even as his stomach churned. The woman was recently dead, within the hour, judging by the warmth still fading from her skin, which meant the killer might well be nearby, might even be watching him now from among the plants and shadows. He should raise the alarm, should summon help, should preserve the scene for the police. But first, he took the notebook from Miss Fenn's cooling fingers. The pages were covered in a cramped, spidery hand, written in some kind of shorthand or code that would take time to decipher. But one page had been marked with a ribbon. crimson ribbon, identical to the murder weapon, and on that page, 3 words had been written in plain English. It was him. Poirot stared at the words, willing them to yield their meaning. Him. But which him? Valentine, with his debts and his desperate rage. The Count, with his mysterious origins and his influence over Lord Thorne. Sir Gerald, with his access to the family's secrets and his perhaps not quite honest handling of the estate. Julian, whose saintliness seemed increasingly like a mask for something darker. Or someone else entirely. Someone Poirot had not yet considered. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made him rise swiftly, pocketing the notebook with the instincts of long practice. He moved away from the body, positioning himself near the entrance to the conservatory, and waited. The door opened, and Clarissa Thorne entered, wrapped in a dressing gown, her face pale with fear.
Monsieur Poirot, I heard something. A cry, perhaps, and I came down to investigate. What?
She stopped, her eyes widening as they fell on the body.
Oh, God. Oh, dear God. Is that...
Miss Fenn, oui. She is dead, mademoiselle. Murdered. Clarissa's hand flew to her mouth.
The curse,
she whispered.
It's begun, just as I feared.
It is not the curse, Poirot said firmly. It is a murderer, flesh and blood, who has done this thing. And I intend to find them before they can strike again. He guided Clarissa from the conservatory. She seemed on the verge of collapse, and together they raised the alarm. Within minutes, the household was awake and assembled in the entrance hall, their faces a study in shock and fear, and, in some cases, Poirot noted, something that looked very much like calculation. Lord Thorne took charge with the authority of his position, dispatching Jenkins to the village to summon the police and directing Blackwood to seal the conservatory until the authorities arrived. Valentine, who had appeared still half drunk and wholly bewildered, demanded to know what was happening. Sophia watched everything with eyes that revealed nothing. Julian offered to pray for the deceased, while Beatrice loudly proclaimed that she had always known something terrible would happen, and this was simply proof that Dorian should never have invited so many unsuitable people to Christmas. The Count, Poirot noted, was the last to appear, arriving some minutes after the others with apologies for his tardiness and an expression of perfectly calibrated concern. His alibi, whatever it might prove to be, would need to be examined with particular care. The police arrived with the dawn. Inspector Graves from the Derbyshire Constabulary, a solid man with a walrus moustache and a manner that suggested he was not entirely pleased to find a famous Belgian detective already on the scene. He was accompanied by a doctor, a photographer, and 2 constables who looked young enough to be thoroughly overwhelmed by the grandeur of Whitmore Abbey. Poirot introduced himself and offered his assistance, which Inspector Graves accepted with a mixture of relief and resentment that the Belgian had seen many times before. They examined the body together, noting the position, the ribbon, the signs of struggle that were present but not extensive. Miss Fenn had been surprised. Poirot deduced, attacked from behind before she could cry out or defend herself. Time of death approximately midnight, the doctor pronounced. Strangulation with a ligature, this ribbon here, applied with considerable force. Whoever did this was strong and determined. Or desperate, Poirot murmured. What's that? I said, Inspector, that the murderer was perhaps acting in desperation. Miss Fenn had information that she intended to share with me. Someone was willing to kill to prevent that. Inspector Graves' eyebrows rose. Information? What kind of information? Poirot told him of the meeting that had been arranged, though he did not mention the notebook now resting in his pocket. That revelation could wait until he had had time to study its contents. The inspector listened with growing concern, making notes in a leather-bound pad, his walrus moustache twitching with each new detail. So the victim was going to tell you something. Something about a murder, you say. And now she's dead herself. That's a pretty situation, Monsieur Poirot. A pretty situation indeed. It is more than pretty, Inspector. It suggests that the murderer is someone within this house. Someone who knew of the meeting and wished to prevent it. But who could have known? Did you tell anyone? No. And Miss Fenn, she impressed upon me the need for secrecy. Poirot paused. But secrets, Inspector, have a way of escaping. A whisper here, a glance there, a piece of paper left carelessly on a desk. It would take very little for the wrong person to learn of our rendezvous. Or, he thought, but did not say, Miss Fenn herself might have spoken to someone, might have tried to extract advantage from her information before delivering it to him, might have played a dangerous game and lost. The household was questioned, one by one, each guest and servant asked to account for their movements during the night. The answers were predictably unsatisfying. Everyone claimed to have been asleep. Everyone claimed to have heard nothing. Everyone expressed shock and horror at the crime, while revealing nothing of substance. Valentine's alibi was perhaps the weakest. He admitted to having walked the halls for some time after his confrontation at dinner, unable to sleep. But his condition had been such that he could hardly have managed the precise, silent attack that had killed Miss Fenn. Sophia claimed to have been asleep beside her husband, though Valentine seemed uncertain on this point. The Count had been in his room, corresponding with business associates in London, and could produce letters he had been writing to prove it. Julian had spent the night in prayer, or so he said, in the small chapel attached to the east wing. Sir Gerald, interestingly, had no alibi at all. He claimed to have been asleep, but there was no one to confirm this, and his room was conveniently close to the servants' stair that led down to the conservatory. Beatrice had been awake, she admitted, troubled by indigestion from the rich dinner, but she had not left her room, and besides, her voice dripped with outrage, the very suggestion that she might have murdered her own companion of 30 years was monstrous, simply monstrous. Lord Thorne, frail but composed, had been in his study until the small hours, working on personal papers. His valet could confirm the time he had finally retired, 1:30, well after the murder, but could not vouch for his master's movements before that. And Clarissa? Clarissa had heard a sound, or thought she had, and had come down to investigate, arriving at the conservatory mere moments after Poirot himself. It was thin, very thin, but her shock at discovering the body had seemed genuine. Inspector Graves declared his intention to continue the investigation after Christmas, with additional officers being brought in from Derby. In the meantime, he advised strongly, that no one leave Whitmore Abbey, and that all guests and servants should make themselves available for further questioning. "I must warn you, my lord," he said to Lord Thorne, "that given the circumstances, the history of violence in this house, the apparent targeting of a witness, I have considerable concerns about the safety of everyone under this roof. Perhaps the Christmas festivities should be cancelled, and the guests dispersed to places of greater security. Lord Thorne shook his head slowly. Inspector, I am an old man, and this may well be my last Christmas. I will not let fear dictate my final days. The festivities will proceed as planned. The curse, if curse there be, has taken its victim. We must mourn Miss Fenn, certainly, but we must also live. It was, Poirot thought, either the statement of a man of remarkable courage, or the calculation of a man who knew more than he was saying. The day that followed, Christmas Eve, passed in a fog of tension and barely suppressed fear. The household went through the motions of celebration, decorating the final boughs and preparing for the evening's carol service. But there was no joy in it. Miss Fenn's body had been removed to the village, where it awaited the arrival of a coroner from London, and her room had been sealed by the police. But her absence hung over everything, a constant reminder of what had happened and what might happen still. Poirot retreated to his room and spent the morning studying the notebook he had taken from the dead woman's hand. The code was not complex, a simple substitution cipher based on a key that proved to be the first line of "God Save the King." And by midday, he had translated enough to understand why Miss Fenn had died. The notebook was a chronicle of secrets, gathered over 30 years of service, recording every scandal, every indiscretion, every hidden shame that the Thorne family had tried to bury. There were entries about Valentine's gambling debts, far more. Extensive than even Clarissa had suggested. He owed money not merely to bookmakers, but to men who were, the notebook implied, willing to collect in blood if gold was not forthcoming. There were entries about Sophia's past, revealing that she had not merely been a chorus girl, but had been involved in a blackmail scheme that had brought down a minor member of the aristocracy. There were entries about Julian's departure from his first parish, shrouded in rumours of an inappropriate relationship with a married woman. There were entries about Sir Gerald's handling of the estate accounts, suggesting systematic embezzlement stretching back at least a decade. And there were entries about the Count, entries that made Poirot's magnificent moustache twitch with interest and alarm. Count Alexei Volkonsky, the notebook revealed, was not who he claimed to be. The documents he had presented to Lord Thorne, proof of his connection to the Thorne family through centuries-old marriages, were forgeries, and not particularly good ones at that. Miss Fenn had seen them, had examined them in secret, and had determined that the Count was an impostor, a confidence trickster who had targeted the elderly Lord Thorne with the intention of weaseling his way into the inheritance. But that was not the most damning revelation. On the final page of translated text, Miss Fenn had written something that made Poirot's blood run cold. The Count is not merely a fraud. I believe he is also a murderer. I have discovered evidence linking him to the death of Marcus Thorne in 1920. He was here at Whitmore Abbey on that Christmas night. He was using a different name then. Several witnesses can confirm this, but it was him. I believe he killed Marcus Thorne, and I believe he has returned to claim what he failed to obtain the first time. I have arranged to meet Monsieur Poirot and give him this notebook. If anything should happen to me, let this serve as my testimony. The Count killed Marcus Thorne, and he means to kill again. Poirot sat back in his chair, his grey cells working at fever pitch. If Miss Fenn's accusations were true, and the evidence she had compiled was compelling, then the Count was not merely a fortune hunter, but a murderer, return to the scene of his crime to complete whatever scheme he had begun 30 years ago. But there were still questions. Who was the Count, really? How had he known Marcus Thorne, and why had he killed him? What was the connection to the Thorne family that he had tried to fabricate with forged documents? And most importantly, if he had killed Miss Fenn to silence her, did he know that Poirot now possessed her notebook? And if so, would the Belgian detective be his next target? There was a knock at his door, and Poirot hastily concealed the notebook beneath his mattress before calling out, "Entrez!" It was Lord Thorne, looking older and more fragile than he had the day before, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane. "Monsieur,"
Poirot, he said, settling into the offered chair with evident relief. "I must speak with you. About the murder, yes, but also about other matters." "I am at your service, my lord." Lord Thorne was silent for a moment, his eyes focused on some distant point. Then, "I know why Miss Fenn was killed. Or rather, I can guess. She was a collector of secrets, that woman. 30 years in my sister's service, always watching, always listening, always writing in that damned notebook of hers. I suspect she knew things about every person in this house, including me." "You knew about the notebook?" "I suspected. There were times when she would look at me with an expression that said she knew exactly what I had done, what we had all done, and was merely waiting for the right moment to use that knowledge." He paused. "In retrospect, I should have dismissed her years ago. But Beatrice would not hear of it, and I suppose I was afraid of what she might say if cornered." "What did she know about you, my lord?" The old man's laugh was bitter. "Everything, Monsieur Poirot. She knew about my time in Constantinople, the deals I made, the compromises I accepted, the things I did in service to my country that would not bear examination in the cold light of peace. She knew about the money I paid to keep certain stories out of the newspapers, and about the promises I broke to people who trusted me." He met Poirot's eyes. "And she knew about Cedric." "Your brother, the one who disappeared after Marcus Thorne's murder?" "Yes." Lord Thorne's voice was barely above a whisper. She knew what really happened to Cedric. The silence stretched between them, pregnant with revelation. Poirot waited, his patience infinite, and finally Lord Thorne continued. "Cedric did not flee the country, Monsieur Poirot. He never left Whitmore Abbey. He is buried in the family crypt, in a coffin marked with the name of an aunt who died in childhood. I put him there myself, the night after Marcus was killed." "You killed your brother?" "No." The denial was firm, almost vehement. "No, I did not kill him. But I know who did, and I helped to conceal the crime. And that has been the curse that has haunted this family ever since. Not the Nutcracker's curse, but my own. The curse of silence, of complicity, of guilt that cannot be expiated." "Who killed Cedric, my lord?" Lord Thorne opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the sound of a gunshot cracked through the winter air. Both men froze, and then Poirot was on his feet and running, Lord Thorne forgotten in his wake. The shot had come from the direction of the library, and he sprinted through the corridors with a speed that belied his compact frame, arriving to find a scene of chaos. Valentine Thorne lay on the library floor, blood spreading from a wound in his shoulder, his face white with shock. Standing over him, a smoking pistol still in his hand, was the Count, and his expression was not that of an attacker but of a man defending himself. "He came at me with a knife!" the Count exclaimed. "I had no choice. It was self-defense, I swear it." Sophia pushed past Poirot and fell to her knees beside her husband, her earlier coldness replaced by what seemed like genuine concern.
Valentine! Valentine, can you hear me?
The wounded man groaned, his eyes fluttering open.
He's lying, he managed. He's a fraud, a murderer. I was trying to protect.
That's enough. Inspector Graves appeared in the doorway, constables at his heels. Everyone step back. You, he pointed at the Count. Put down that weapon immediately. The Count complied, his face a mask of offended dignity. I tell you, Inspector, the man attacked me. I was merely reading in the library when he burst in, raving about how I had killed someone. I don't even know who he was talking about. And came at me with that. He gestured to a letter opener lying on the floor, its blade still clean.
He's lying,
Valentine said again, his voice stronger now as Sophia pressed a handkerchief against his wound.
I found proof. Proof that he killed Marcus Thorne in 1920. I was going to confront him, yes, but I didn't attack him. He shot me to shut me up, just like he killed Miss Fenn.
The inspector's eyes narrowed. Proof? What kind of proof? Valentine's hand fumbled in his pocket and emerged with a crumpled photograph.
This. I found it in Miss Fenn's room. She must have hidden it there years ago. Look at it, Inspector. Look at the man in the background of the picture.
Graves took the photograph and studied it, his walrus moustache twitching. Poirot moved closer and saw what Valentine had seen. A group photograph, dated 1920, according to the notation on the back, showing the guests at that year's Christmas ball. And there, half hidden behind a potted palm, was a face that was unmistakably the Count. 30 years younger, but the same high cheekbones, the same dark eyes, the same arrogant tilt of the head.
That man, Valentine said, was at Whitmore Abbey the night Marcus was murdered. He was using a different name then, calling himself Peter Novak, some kind of art dealer from Prague. But it's him. It's definitely him. The Count's composure cracked, just for a moment, before he recovered. A coincidence of resemblance, nothing more. I have never been to this house before this Christmas. You're lying, Valentine spat. You killed Marcus, and then you came back pretending to be some long-lost cousin so you could get your hands on the inheritance. What happened? Did Marcus find out about your scheme? Did he threaten to expose you? This is absurd.
Enough! Inspector Graves held up his hand. Count Volkonsky, or whatever your name is, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. The Count drew himself up with wounded dignity. This is an outrage. I am a nobleman of Russia, and I will not be treated like a common criminal. My embassy will hear of this.
The Russian embassy, Poirot observed quietly, has not existed since the revolution. If you are, indeed, a white Russian émigré, you have no diplomatic protection whatsoever. For a moment, naked hatred flashed in the Count's eyes, hatred directed not at Valentine, nor at the inspector, but at Poirot himself. Then the mask descended once more, and he allowed himself to be led away by the constables. In the confusion that followed, the summoning of the doctor, the transport of Valentine to his room, the shocked exclamations of the other guests, Poirot slipped away. He had much to think about, and very little time in which to think it. Because despite everything, despite the photograph, despite Valentine's accusation, despite the Count's damning reaction, something did not add up.
Poirot's grey cells were sending him a warning, an insistent signal that the truth was not yet fully revealed. The Count might well be a fraud and a murderer, but Poirot was increasingly certain that he had not killed Miss Fenn, which meant that somewhere in Whitmore Abbey, another murderer was still at large. Christmas Eve drew to a close with an atmosphere more funereal than festive. The carol service in the village had been cancelled. It seemed inappropriate under the circumstances, and the traditional unveiling of the Nutcracker was postponed indefinitely. The guests gathered for a subdued dinner, their numbers reduced by Valentine's injury and the Count's arrest, and conversation was desultory at best. Poirot observed the remaining company with renewed attention. The Count's arrest had changed the dynamics of the group, but not in the ways he might have expected. Sophia, far from being distressed by her husband's shooting, seemed almost relieved, as though a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Julian was watchful and tense, his earlier sanctimonious calm replaced by a nervousness that spoke of secrets not yet revealed. Sir Gerald drank more than usual, his florid face flushing to an alarming shade as the evening progressed. And Beatrice, who might have been expected to mourn the loss of her long-time companion, seemed more angry than grieved. Angry at being inconvenienced, angry at being questioned, angry at the disruption to her comfortable existence. Only Clarissa and Lord Thorne appeared genuinely distressed. The young woman pale and frightened, the old man withdrawn into a silence that seemed to have nothing to do with his earlier revelation about Cedric. He had not finished his story, Poirot remembered. He had been about to reveal who had killed his brother when the gunshot interrupted them. Did that person still walk among them? Was there a connection between the murder of Cedric Thorne 30 years ago and the murder of Miss Fenn 2 nights past? After dinner, Poirot excused himself and made his way to the entrance hall, where the Nutcracker still stood on its mantelpiece, watching over the festive decorations with its ruby eyes. He stood before it for a long time, this wooden soldier that had presided over so much death, trying to understand what it was about the object that troubled him. It was beautiful, certainly, valuable beyond question, and it was, according to legend, cursed. A curse that demanded a life in payment for each generation. But curses did not kill people. People killed people, using the curse as cover for their crimes. He reached out and touched the Nutcracker, just as he had that first night. The wood was cold beneath his fingers, smooth and lifeless. And yet, there was something wrong with it, something different. Poirot's grey cells, trained over decades to notice the minutest details, were screaming at him that something had changed, that the Nutcracker he was touching was not quite the same object he had examined 2 days ago. He leaned closer, studying the painted face in the light of the chandelier. The ruby eyes glinted up at him, unchanged. The uniform was the same, every button and braid exactly as he remembered. The jaw mechanism worked smoothly when he tested it. But the left hand was different. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone not specifically looking for it might have missed it. But the position of the left hand had changed. Before, the fingers had been curled loosely around the handle of a tiny ceremonial sword. Now, they were clenched into a fist. Poirot stepped back, his mind racing. Objects did not move on their own. Someone had touched the Nutcracker, had manipulated its hands into a different position. But why? What could possibly be the purpose of such a change? Unless... He seized the Nutcracker and lifted it from the mantelpiece.
ignoring the superstitious dread that crept up his spine. The object was heavier than he expected, and as he turned it over in his hands, he felt something shift inside. Something that should not be there. "What are you doing?" He turned to find Lord Thorne watching him from the doorway, his ancient face unreadable. "I am examining the Nutcracker, my lord. With your permission, of course." "You have my permission. I gave you leave to investigate anything in this house." The old man came closer, his cane tapping on the marble floor. "Have you found something?" "I believe so. Tell me, my lord, when was the last time the Nutcracker was examined? Cleaned, perhaps, or restored?" Lord Thorne frowned. "Not for many years. It is too valuable to entrust to ordinary craftsmen, and the specialist who used to maintain it died before the war." "Why do you ask?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he carried the Nutcracker to a nearby table and began to examine it more closely, looking for seams or joins that might indicate a hidden compartment. The object was masterfully constructed, every detail fitted together with precision that spoke of genius. But there, at the base, concealed beneath the ceremonial stand, was a thin line that might have been a crack, or might have been something else entirely. He pressed, twisted, and the base of the Nutcracker slid open to reveal a hollow cavity within. Inside the cavity was a folded document, yellowed with age, but still legible. Lord Thorne drew a sharp breath. "What is that?" Poirot unfolded the document carefully, his grey cells already leaping ahead to conclusions. It was a will. A last will and testament, dated 1897, bearing the signature of Lord Thorne's father, and witnessed by two servants whose names meant nothing to him. But the contents of the will were explosive. It named as sole heir not the eldest son, not the man who had eventually become the current Lord Thorne, but the second son, Cedric. The entire estate, including the Nutcracker and all other family treasures, had been left to Cedric Thorne, with his elder brother receiving only a small allowance. "My God," Lord Thorne whispered. "I never knew. I never even suspected." "This will," Poirot said slowly, "it was never executed. Your father's official will, the one that was read after his death, it left everything to you." "Yes, the will I knew about left me the estate, and Cedric a substantial but lesser portion." The old man's face was ashen. "But this changes everything. If this will is genuine, then I have been living in my brother's house for the past 50 years. The title, the estate, the fortune, none of it was ever rightfully mine." "And your brother," Poirot said quietly. "Your brother was murdered before he could claim his inheritance. Tell me, my lord, who killed Cedric?" Lord Thorne closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was that of a man confessing sins held secret for half a lifetime. "My father killed him. My own father, to ensure that the estate would pass to me rather than to Cedric. He killed his own son to protect what he saw as the proper order of things. The eldest son inheriting, the family line continuing as it should. And then he died himself the very next year and took his secret to the grave." He paused. "I learned the truth from a deathbed confession. Not my father's, but the old butlers who had helped conceal the crime. I've carried that knowledge ever since, never knowing quite what to do with it. But someone else knew, Poirot said. Miss Fenn knew. That was one of the secrets she held over you. Yes, she knew everything. And now she is dead, and the Count is arrested, and still I cannot escape the feeling that the worst is yet to come. As if in answer to his words, the great clock in the hall began to strike midnight. Christmas Day had arrived at Whitmore Abbey, and with it, inevitably, came murder. The scream came from the upper floors, a sound of pure terror that shattered the midnight silence and brought every occupant of Whitmore Abbey running from their rooms. Poirot, who had been about to mount the grand staircase, reversed direction and took the steps 3 at a time, his compact frame moving with surprising agility. The scream had come from Sophia's room, the room she shared with Valentine, though her husband was currently confined to the sick room under the doctor's care. When Poirot arrived, he found the door standing open and a tableau of horror within. Sophia Thorne lay across the bed, her flame-red hair spread across the pillow like a pool of blood, her beautiful face frozen in an expression of shock and terror. Around her throat, wound tight as a lover's embrace, was a length of crimson ribbon, the same ribbon that had killed Miss Fenn. "Don't touch anything," Poirot commanded as the others crowded into the doorway behind him. He moved to the bed and examined the body with clinical precision, noting the details that would be crucial to the investigation: the position of the hands, the condition of the room, the slight warmth that still lingered in the cooling flesh. Sophia had been dead less than an hour. While they had been in the entrance hall, discovering the hidden will and talking of murders past, another murder had been committed right above their heads. Inspector Graves arrived within minutes, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. 2 murders in 3 days, he said heavily, and the main suspect is locked up in my cells. Either we have the wrong man, or there are 2 killers, Poirot finished. That has been my suspicion for some time, Inspector. The household was questioned again, alibis checked and rechecked, but the truth remained elusive. Valentine, still recovering from his gunshot wound and heavily sedated, could not have committed the crime. The Count remained in custody. Lord Thorne had been with Poirot in the entrance hall. Sir Gerald claimed to have been in the billiard room, though no one could confirm it. Julian had been in the chapel, praying, or so he said, and Beatrice had vanished entirely. It was Clarissa who noticed her aunt's absence, and Clarissa who raised the alarm. A search of the house revealed Beatrice's room empty, the window standing open despite the bitter cold, footprints in the snow leading toward the ruined chapel at the edge of the estate. Poirot led the search party through the blizzard, following the trail of prints that were already filling with fresh snow. The chapel loomed before them, a Gothic silhouette against the grey sky, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at the approaching figures. Inside, they found Beatrice standing before the altar, her iron-grey hair wild about her face, her eyes burning with a terrible light. "I wondered how long it would take," she said as they entered. "I've been waiting here, saying goodbye to ghosts." "Madame," Poirot said carefully, "we must speak about Miss Fenn, and about Sophia, and about Marcus Thorne, who died in this house 30 years ago." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You've worked it out then?"
Clever little Belgian. Yes, I killed them. All of them. Miss Fenn, who had been bleeding me dry for 30 years with her knowledge of what I did to Marcus. And Sophia, that grasping creature who discovered Miss Fenn's notebook and thought she could take over the blackmail where the old woman left off. And Marcus? Marcus was going to destroy us all. Beatrice's voice hardened. He had discovered the truth about his father, about Cedric and the hidden will, and the murder that my father committed to protect the family legacy. He was going to expose everything, drag the Thorne name through the mud, destroy what generations had built. I couldn't allow that. So you killed him, with a ribbon from the Christmas decorations. It was poetic, don't you think? The curse of the Nutcracker, claiming another victim. No one questioned it. No one looked too closely. The legend protected me, just as I had protected the family. She reached into her coat and withdrew a small pistol, and Poirot felt his heart clench with sudden fear. But now the legend ends, Beatrice continued, raising the weapon not toward the detective, but toward her own temple. The curse dies with me. No more murders, no more secrets, no more... Wait! Poirot's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Before you do this thing, madame, you must know the truth. The whole truth, which even you do not possess. Beatrice hesitated, the pistol wavering. What truth? The truth about the Nutcracker, about the will hidden in its base, about what your father really intended when he committed murder to protect the family. Poirot took a step forward, his eyes locked on hers. You thought you were protecting the Thorne legacy, did you not? You thought that by killing Cedric's son, you were ensuring that the estate would remain in the proper hands. But you were wrong, madame. You were terribly, tragically wrong. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the hidden will, the document he had found in the Nutcracker's secret compartment. This will, dated 1897, names Cedric Thorne as sole heir to the estate. But there is a codicil, added just days before your father's death, that changes everything. Poirot unfolded the document, revealing a second page that had been tucked behind the first. In this codicil, your father acknowledges his crime, the murder of Cedric, and expresses his deepest remorse. He states that the estate should pass not to his eldest son, but to his daughter, Beatrice, in recognition of her loyalty and sacrifice. Beatrice's face went white. What? You were to inherit everything, madame. You, not your brother. Your father knew what you had done. He knew that you, not he, had actually struck the fatal blow that killed Cedric. He knew, and he loved you for it, in his twisted way. This will was his final gift to you, hidden in the one place where it might eventually be found. But I didn't know. No, you did not know. And so you killed Marcus and Miss Fenn and Sophia to protect an inheritance that was already yours by right. You committed murder after murder, all for nothing. The pistol dropped from Beatrice's nerveless fingers, clattering on the stone floor. She swayed, and Julian, who had been standing silent and horrified throughout, rushed forward to catch her before she fell.
All for nothing,
she whispered.
All those deaths, all that blood, and it was mine all along.
She began to laugh, a terrible sound that echoed through the ruined chapel and seemed to shake the very stones. And then the laughter turned to weeping, and she collapsed into Julian's arms, broken at last by the weight of her crimes. The police took Beatrice Thorne away as the Christmas morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow-covered grounds of Whitmore Abbey in shades of gold and rose. The Count was released with grudging apologies. He was a fraud, certainly, but not a murderer. And Valentine, informed of his wife's death and his aunt's arrest, retreated into a silence that might have been grief or might have been relief. Lord Thorne, aged beyond his years by the revelations of the past days, called Poirot into his study for a final conversation. "What happens now?" he asked. "To the estate, to the family, to all of us." Poirot considered the question carefully.
The law will take its course, my lord. Your sister will stand trial for her crimes, and justice, such as it is, will be served. As for the estate,
He paused.
the hidden will, if validated, would make Beatrice the rightful owner. But given her crimes, she will certainly be unable to inherit. The estate will likely pass to you, after all, or to your designated heir.
Valentine. Lord Thorne's voice was bitter. A gambler and a wastrel, married to a blackmailer, and yet he is all that remains of the Thorne line.
Perhaps
Poirot suggested gently.
it is time to break with tradition. The curse of the Nutcracker was never supernatural, my lord. It was simply the curse of a family that valued legacy above humanity, that was willing to kill to preserve what it believed was rightfully its own. If you wish to end that curse, you must choose a different path.
Lord Thorne was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. The Nutcracker will go to a museum, where it can be admired without causing harm. And the estate..." He smiled, and there was something almost peaceful in his expression. "The estate will go to Clarissa. She has the intelligence and the integrity that this family has lacked for generations. Perhaps she can build something better from the ashes." Poirot took his leave of Whitmore Abbey on Christmas afternoon, the Rolls-Royce carrying him through roads now cleared of snow toward the station and London beyond. As the great house receded in the rear window, he saw the Nutcracker being carried out by 2 footmen, on its way, presumably, to begin its new life as a museum exhibit, rather than a family curse. Jenkins, at the wheel, caught his eye in the mirror. "A terrible business, sir, if you don't mind my saying so."
"Terrible indeed," Poirot agreed. 3 women dead, a family destroyed, and all because of secrets that should have been revealed generations ago.
He stroked his magnificent moustache, his grey cells already beginning to settle into the pleasant torpor of a case concluded.
But it is over now. The curse is broken, the murderer is caught, and the Thorne family may perhaps find the peace that has eluded them for so long. Do you believe in curses, sir? Truly?"
Poirot considered the question as the Derbyshire hills rolled past, white and silent in the winter afternoon.
"I believe, Jenkins, in the capacity of human beings to create their own curses, to trap themselves in cycles of violence and deception from which there seems no escape. The Nutcracker did not kill anyone. It was merely a beautiful object caught up in the ugliness of human nature."
He paused, watching a flight of crows rise from a snow-covered field.
"But I also believe in the capacity of human beings to break those cycles, to choose truth over deception, mercy over vengeance, love over fear. That is the only way to defeat a curse, Jenkins. Not with magic or ritual, but with the simple, difficult choice to be better than those who came before."
The chauffeur nodded slowly.
A wise thought, sir. A Christmas thought, if I may say so. Indeed, Poirot smiled. And now, if you please, let us make haste to the station. I have a sudden longing for my own fireside, my own tisane, and a Christmas entirely free of nutcrackers, curses, and murder.
The car accelerated, carrying Hercule Poirot away from Whitmore Abbey and toward the comforts of civilization. Behind him, the great house stood silent against the winter sky, its secrets finally laid bare, its curse at last broken. And in the entrance hall, the space where the Nutcracker had stood for 150 years remained empty, a void that seemed, somehow, less like an absence than a liberation. Epilogue. 3 months later, on a grey March afternoon, Hercule Poirot received a visitor at his London flat. Clarissa Thorne, now Lady Clarissa Thorne, following her uncle's decision to adopt her formally as his heir, sat across from him in the comfortable sitting room, a cup of tisane warming her hands. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, "for everything you did at Christmas, for saving us from ourselves, I suppose." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "And how is your uncle, mademoiselle? Pardon, I should say, my lady." "Better than expected, actually. The doctors say his heart condition has stabilized, and he's taken a new interest in life since the burden of the family secrets was lifted." She smiled. "He spends most of his time now cataloguing the family archives, separating truth from legend. He says that future generations deserve to know their real history, not the sanitized version that was passed down for so long. A noble endeavor. And Valentine?" Clarissa's expression clouded. "Valentine has gone abroad. South America, I believe. He inherited a small sum from Sophia's estate. Apparently she had money of her own, though no one knew it. And he's using it to start fresh, somewhere no one knows the Thorne name." She paused. "I think it's for the best. He was never suited to be master of Whitmore Abbey." "And the Nutcracker? It is settled in its new home?" "Oh, yes. The Victoria and Albert Museum was delighted to receive it. They've given it pride of place in their European decorative arts collection." Clarissa's smile returned. "They've also put up a plaque explaining its history, the real history, including the murders and the supposed curse. The curator told me it's become one of their most popular exhibits. People queue for hours just to see it." "How fitting," Poirot mused. "An object that was hidden away for so long, the centre of so much secrecy and death, now displayed openly for all the world to see. There is a certain justice in that." "That's rather what I thought." Clarissa set down her cup and met his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, may I ask you something? Something that's been troubling me since Christmas?" "But of course." "My Aunt Beatrice, at her trial, she claimed that she acted alone, that no one else in the family knew about the murders, or the hidden will, or any of it. But I can't help wondering—" She hesitated. "I can't help wondering if that's really true. My uncle seemed so unsurprised by everything that came out, as if he had suspected all along and simply chosen not to see." Poirot was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "There are different kinds of knowledge, my lady. There is the knowledge of the intellect, which deals in facts and evidence and logical deduction. And there is the knowledge of the heart, which senses things that the mind refuses to acknowledge." He paused. "I believe your uncle knew, in his heart, that something was very wrong in his family. But he chose not to pursue that knowledge, because the truth would have been too terrible to bear." "Is that a crime?" It is a failing, a human failing, born of love and fear and the desperate desire to believe that those we care for are better than they are. Poirot's grey eyes were gentle. But it is not the same as murder, my lady. Your uncle did not kill anyone. He merely looked away when he should have looked more closely. Clarissa nodded slowly. I suppose that's all any of us can do, isn't it? Try to look closely at the truth, even when it's painful. Try to break the patterns that our families have created, instead of perpetuating them. Précisément, Poirot smiled. And that, my lady, is why I have every confidence that the Thorne family is in good hands. You have already demonstrated the courage to face difficult truths. That is the foundation upon which a better legacy can be built. After Clarissa had gone, Poirot stood at his window, watching the late afternoon light fade over the rooftops of London. The case of the Christmas Nutcracker mystery, as the newspapers had dubbed it, had been one of the strangest of his career. A tangle of old crimes and new, of family secrets stretching back over a century, of a curse that was not a curse at all, but merely the echo of human wickedness perpetuating itself through generations. And yet, in the end, the cycle had been broken. The truth had come to light. The guilty had been punished, and the innocent, such as they were, had been given a chance to begin again. It was not a perfect resolution. Justice rarely was. But it was something. Poirot turned from the window and went to make himself another cup of tisane. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing the hour. All was well. The end.